Radio. So thank you, everyone, for coming along to part 2 of this workshop. We've got like 99 or something slides again, so we'll see how far. I think it was slide 19 we got to last time. Thank you, Jen, for helping me decipher that. So we'll see how we go. I'm just going to quickly run through sort of a quick overview for those first 19 slides, I guess. And then we'll move on from there. So, of course, just starting off today's session, acknowledging that the First Nation owners, Turrbal and the Yagara of these lands where QT now stands, and acknowledging these have always been places of teaching, research and learning. So last time we went through sort of an introduction overview, I guess, in that sense, to large and augmented language models. So like the GPTs, the cloud models, what else do we got? The Google sort of Gemma and so on. Some really interesting things about these ones in general. You get these sort of emergent properties, things we didn't really design for or count for in the design, development, training process. These behaviors or sort of, little sort of action possibilities, I guess, have been encoded from that training data set into the model and its sort of knowledge base in that sense. So you can, in that sense, offload some of the work that you would need to do previously around, reasoning for the model. You can offload that to this sort of general knowledge base, which they develop. There's a bunch of different components and sort of methods, techniques that go into it. So your NLP, natural language processing, neural nets, machine learning, deep learning, reinforcement learning. And lots of data. When you're thinking about large language models, so those ones that have been sort of trained on, hundreds of gigabytes, petabytes, terabytes, that sort of thing, lots and lots of data, large language models, lots of parameters, okay, basically many layers of the model, lots of different parameters that are sort of generated in that model. Maybe it's like thousands of dimensions sort of thing as the output, maybe even more. But ultimately, they are just sequence to sequence predictions, right? So I feed in some text or some, an image or some sound, and I got to predict what would be the most likely sequence to follow that input sequence. Noting that we do also have, like, I guess, just a bit of a return to this sort of knowledge engineering, rule-based systems through prompt engineering, which is where we got up to in our last session. So these large language models, they go through a couple of rounds of training or sort of several stages in their development. The first step is you've got all this data. And I sort of run weeks sort of worth of training on that data set. This big sort of everything on the human net, just raw web pages, things like that. Not very useful. Sort of output comes from that initial training process. So I get this sort of GPT-3 raw, I'll call it. The GPT-3 raw, I can ask it some questions, but it's going to give me gibberish back. Okay, so it'll just try and match, I say some input sort of query, and it'll just match closest sort of or most highly predicted words around your input sequence. So it's not very useful after that first 2-3 weeks, right? The model, lots of sort of very, very, very large knowledge base, but it's not readily applied just yet. We need to go through some fine tuning, some assistant fine tuning before we get to the state where we get these ChatGPT models. Okay, so the assistant, okay, we train it with some question answer pairs. Okay, so rather than the raw text from the web, I might use like the Stanford question answer sort of data set. I'm training the model to sort of answer and use its knowledge in a practical sort of way in that sense. So I get the first round, I get this raw fine-tuned model. If I ask it a question, it might just try and pin a bunch of random words together that should, based on statistical probabilities, should be closely related. It doesn't really make much sense, okay? Until we do this assistant fine-tuning, where we provided answers or sort of examples of how an agent and a person or a user should interact. Okay, so with that assistant fine-tuning, I get these nice outputs where now I can talk to this thing like it's an assistant, and I can ask it questions, and it actually gives me fairly decent responses, which I've still got to be critical, of course, of. So we've got the fine tuning with the assistant sort of this assistant model. That's your, we'll call it the one that ChatGPT uses, the assistant model. It's gone through the fine tuning after the initial training. I can augment that model even further. So I've got this assistant fine tune model, but I can add, say, the ability to search the web or to run code. Python code, or the codex, or maybe I want to give it the ability to sort of generate speech, text to speech, or maybe listen and extract from audio to text. Maybe I want to give it access to different databases or sort of search retrieval mechanisms, like go search the web, go check this code book that we've developed, or this set of rules, and every time you answer, go check that first and then answer, things like that. Prompt engineering is another one of those wings to sort of augment them. Basically, building on top of these pre-trained models, the assistant fine-tuned models, and improving their performance in, say, particular specific domains, maybe medical knowledge, or maybe it's improving its performance in a task. Maybe it's search retrieval or whatever, or summarizing meeting notes, things like that. Using these sort of different prompts, I suppose, to guide and give you more control over that output the models are generating. Now, obviously, a lot of different applications from that sort of general problem solver that they've sort of been able to develop out of these augmented language models. And again, just focusing, like, ChatGPT is a really good example, so I'll come back to it a couple of times. It's this Gen AI as a service. This platform, if you've ever used it, hopefully you have. Jump online, check out the web if you haven't. Really good example of this sort of augmented language model and the approach that these guys are taking for agent-based model, which is they're trying to go for this sort of like general AI, I guess. It'll be interesting because GPT-5 is due out weeks to month. So it'll be key. I'm pretty keen to see how that one goes. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has been hyping it up quite a bit. So it'll be cool to see what happens. Now, the idea there as well, you've had this sort of like, GPT-3, then 3.5, then 4. Now, maybe it's 5 coming out soon. With each of those iterations, generally speaking, the models get larger and larger, except for the new one of the newer GPT-4o mini models, which is specifically built and trained or developed for low power applications or running on your local device. Maybe you've heard or not, Apple has partnered with OpenAI for bringing out AI applications through your phone, sort of thing. Your phone, if you're trying to use, well, first off, you wouldn't be able to store GPT-4 or 5 on your phone because it's like 128 gigs, the model sort of parameter file, right? So first off, storage issues. The GPT-4o mini is something like 2 or 3 gigs as an example. Like, so I can sit that on a phone or on a Raspberry Pi, like a standalone computer, and run things locally now, rather than having to go to the web and sending my data over an unsteady or potentially less secure link, right? So if I can bring it local, maybe I have to compromise a little bit because the model's smaller on performance of that model. Maybe I have to think about how I split up the tasks between a smaller model and a larger model. Where do I offload the thinking and the reasoning? Maybe that's better for the bigger model. Maybe the privacy sort of sensitive queries can go via the local model in that sense. So again, GPT, really good example there of this augmented language model. Go check it out if you haven't already. Most of them, I think, have the voice at this point. You should be able to access the voice. The text to image, the text to video maybe is coming out soon for free users, but I know ChatGPT Plus users, subscribers do already have some access there, which is cool. I'm going to skip over this bit and this bit just because we're not even at slide 19 yet, I don't think. Where are we up to? 12, cool. Just a bit more background, I guess, in that sense. Again, I harped on a little bit about question answering. That's essentially what these large language models and ALMs are, right? With the assistant fine tuning, I'm training them to answer questions. You ask a question, I answer it. I might embed some pleases and some thank yous in the model's responses in the training data, and then maybe the model becomes a bit kinder. Or maybe I include some snarky responses or some smart, Alec sort of responses or sarcastic responses. My model becomes more sarcastic. Maybe that's how like Grok, the Twitter one, sort of went about it. But essentially, they're all coming back to this sort of QA system. So broadly, that's what we're doing here. Now, prompt engineering, and finally back to what we got to last time. It's involving these sort of, hopefully, has everyone here used ChatGPT? Yep, sweet. Okay, so you enter in a prompt. If I change the word, it'll change the output, sequence to sequence prediction. If I want it to sort of pay attention to particular things, I need to think about maybe using like XML or those little square squiggly brackets that we talked about last time. Different ways to organize the prompt to ensure that the model is looking at what you want it to look at and grounding its response in the content that you want to ground it in. Does that make sense, Benno? Yeah. You're just frowning. Prompt engineering, it's a fancy way of saying using different words or framing, I guess. Framing in the input to get something else in the output. Behavioral economists should be fairly sort of well placed in that sense for the framing side of things, which is good. Now, it's just worth noting that, even though I could do all this work on the end user prompt in that white sort of box there, I can optimize, I can iterate, I can do as much as I can, but I'm always only in that little white box. I only have control over that white box, right? ChatGPT, the application provider, right? My prompt that I send in, it gets wrapped around their prompt. So they might be saying, respond in a nice way, don't use swear words, something like that. I can do all I want in this middle bit, tell it to swear, do whatever. It's probably going to get overridden by the safety controls of the ChatGPT provider. And then another layer is even during the training process itself, the LMM sort of system provider or developer makes a bunch of choices and tries to build in a bunch of safety mechanisms in the training process itself. And maybe they also add some additional prompt or system instructions, again, guiding the way the model should respond. You are a friendly, helpful assistant versus you are a friendly, helpful assistant that responds in sarcastic comments. I don't know. So just to be aware that your prompt happens in some context of prompts, so or prompt within a promptception, if you want to call it. Just be aware of that. Now, guardrails, I talked a little bit about it. Maybe there's some post-processing sort of guardrails. I look at, the prompt coming in. I do a quick scan. Does it have any harmful content? Does it look like it could be toxic or biased or non-factual? I can build that in to capture, the user sends it in and I capture anything bad before it goes over to the model. I could do it on the back end of it. So the user sends the prompt, we don't check, we send it straight to the model and we check the model's response and we just moderate the model rather than the human. That's another approach. Or again, building it straight into that sort of the training process as well. These ones are more sort of around the information processing architecture, like the before after sort of monitoring of your inputs. So it's a bit of a tack on, I guess, in that sense, the guardrails after the fact. This one anyway. But it's not the only approach. This was one from, I think it was, this was coming in from NVIDIA, this one. This one goes over to a different sort of the Colang model, I think, again. Oh, that is also NVIDIA, so there we go. And Anthropic or Cloud, they'll have their own version as well, and OpenAI, they have their own architecture as well. Basically, what am I saying? There's different ways or different architectures that different system providers have chosen to implement. Okay, so not only do we have this sort of wrapped prompt, this promptception, we've also got choices that they've made in the information processing architecture. What information goes where, at what point, how do we moderate it? There's all these different choices that ultimately you need to be aware of when you're using these different models, right? So, and factor that into the interpretation that you bring from, say, researching with these models.
Would it be interesting to do almost an experiment with them by listing, for example, 100 challenging things in terms of ethics and compliance, and then start testing how they start changing the rules? Because we are in the Wild West, and we don't have a good understanding of science, for example, how is the dynamics of rules, how rules emerge in that sense. So one can, for example, start having this kind of list and are constantly checking with them whether they respond differently. Can be when they updated the system, and just a way of seeing how ethics is included, or how controversial things are done, and that itself is an empirical study. So you actually record, you constantly do the same thing, asking the same things over time, and see how the system actually responds to it, and then you actually visualize it and show that over time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's a framework, OpenAI. I'm sure they've got the similar sort of things in Anthropic and all that. That is called the eval framework or evaluations framework. They've taken the approach with benchmarking there around sort of saying, the more typical sort of AI benchmarking sort of stuff, like, here's my training data set of correct or classify this, what's in the image, or the question answering sort of data set with the Stanford stuff there. You could integrate into the evals framework these more complex sort of social science sort of evaluations or examinations. Yeah. What you're saying is like, we try it out to see rule breaking. It's not, it's hard. There might not be yes and no data set, right? Like a clear cut. So, and
how the system evolves.
It's more of an open evaluation in that sense than a closed evaluation. Going back to the QA thing, that's typically we've been using like extractive sort of QA, or maybe it's more like this sort of closed generative sort of QA, right? Like there's probably like a quite clear answer there of which way, yes or no, or things like that. But with these more complex sort of, the rule breaking one, the same, do you give it an action set? Do you just let it be free? Like here's the rule and you just let it roam free, and how do you interpret that? It's really challenging. But you can wrap it into the evals framework, but how exactly, I don't know. It'd be a really cool contribution to that. It'd be a very big contribution to that framework. Like how to get away from such a, go much more into that sort of open sort of empirical or much more behavioral empirical sort of side of things. The AI community loves their benchmarks and their,
It can also be done from a stand, for example, in a society, like a new society is evolving, which rules do you want to enforce faster than others? So they will put attention on things, on major things, for example, not providing any information on cheating taxes, because taxes are the core of society. In other areas, they will put less attention to it because it's like, I guess a little bit of sense about where do they put attention when you deal with societal issues. And when they start the timing of fixing some of the things or controlling things.
Yeah, it's super cool. And even this was just a random thought that came the other day, but with the idea of doing them over time, because you've got the reinforcement learning from human sort of feedback, right? So the people using the models, you and I, the free users, or I turn my privacy settings off so they don't train on my data anymore, but everyone using it who hasn't changed your settings, we're inadvertently sort of, feeding information back into the training process. And like Benno says, you might be training, maybe I've got a subset of users who are using this thing, these models for bad reasons, bad purposes, hackers or something like that. If I'm training on that subset of data, I might be inadvertently embedding some of those values from that population where that data is being generated from, that we're later training on. I might be embedding their values into the model, right? Maybe, I don't know. So if I have more techie people using my platform, or people from certain sort of geographical areas or sort of cultural groups, if there was already the problem that the training data that we had on the net was like 70% sort of weird countries, Western industrialized sort of highly educated countries, right? But if we're also then training the model, the assistant fine-tuning based on interactions that people have had, or the model has had with weird people, then aren't we optimizing more for the weird rather than the rest? I don't know.
Interesting question. So if you go to Moya's argument, for example, that it's almost impossible to get an image of a submissive man compared to a female. So then it will be interesting to see, okay, how much training data do you need to feed into the system till you break that? It's almost like a norm.
But what do you lose as well? Huh? What do you lose? Because they're trying to untrain some people from the data set, right? Like,
exactly. So how how easy is it to break this kind of
yeah, it'd be interesting. And like,
this is
what comes after that too? If you break that norm, we don't know yet, and that's another emergent sort of property, right?
The sort of direction that I think NVIDIA is really heading to. It's more personalized, at least for companies. AI that tailored to a company. How the response. Reflecting the sort of cultural values of the company itself.
Basically, building an agent for the company, that represents the company.
Exactly. So that goes into
it's like a
breaking that. What is the normal average starting point to most. So I guess that will be seen in next year or so.
Yeah, and they've been like hinting bits and bobs at that with OpenAI. Like again, if you guys have seen like with the chat GPTs, like all the GPTs, they call them like create your own GPTs or assistants, and you can like create like a rule set and the knowledge base for this thing that I can later interact with.
And the question is how that rule set and knowledge base can be fit in as efficient as possible. What is a minimum requirement, and then there goes all the safeguard stuff that you talk about that is tailored specific to the company's rule, for example. I guess that's interesting.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different. Again, the cool thing is there's many ways to sort of skin the cat, I guess, so to say. Which one comes out on top, I don't know. There's a couple of different approaches though. So, but you can see sort of something starting to converge a little bit in the different providers is this, this general sort of model of like Ben said, like this, it's like a pairing, like a digital representation or like a digital companion that represents you or your company or whatever. But again, how much of you can you represent? How much of you, or what parts to represent? And how do you even use the words to get that context, across, like the rich context of who you are? Like, how do you do that? That's crazy. But yes.
So if a company puts a boundary around what's acceptable, and
maybe
the artificial intelligence system gives you a response for what's acceptable, how does a company think out of the side of the square and innovate?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and there is also like the risk of like this. It's a big principal agent problem. If you've heard about some of these the applications and some issues with them around. There was one, I think it was a bank or maybe it was an insurance provider. They were talking to one of their bots, the chat bots, and they've got them to agree to giving some refund or maybe paying out something. Like, I do think, the AI model ended up sort of agreeing with them. I do think you have a case for this claim or something like that. Because it came from the company, technically speaking, on their website, they've had to then honor that. So principal agent problem, we always had it. It's the same problem we've had forever. In that sense, like with the company, we were using people before. But the ways that we sort of had we were able to design incentive structures or the rewards, the punishments. Do those things transfer to AI models readily, or which ones? How do we translate? The more social, organizational sort of power, control, incentives, that sort of thing.
Is not that. That's control. Think of the church during the 13th, 12th, 11th, 12th, and 13th century, which bounded how you could do it, what you could think about, how you responded.
Oh, yeah.
Have we not got a similar situation when a firm puts a boundary on the knowledge base?
Yeah, it depends what you're using it. Using it for. If you're using it for like a chatbot, you kind of want it to be fairly grounded. Stick close to your stuff, the content that you're meant to answer to, the FAQs. But if you're using it as like an innovative, like or creativity product, that's sort of like a ideas sort of tool. You got to be real mindful of that sort of median line that the model tends to take. Like, in the sense of sort of straddling the fence, like, or the average response, the one that's going to get them, you know, if you think about like 1,000 people, all with our sort of different views, values, perspectives, they're going to straddle the response that pisses the less amount of people off, basically. So the average sort of response, maybe a little bit careful, risk averse. So if you're using it for idea generation, where you have to be a bit risky or break norms, then maybe there's a bit of a struggle there, and you know, maybe you got to go to some of the more raw tools and develop your own special model for that sense. So maybe you got to go back to the raw fine-tuned model, and then start over with how you train your assistant with the fine-tuning. So you embed different qualities to go on tangents, to, you know, yeah. So there's different ways to train, but, you know, ultimately there's a really good paper by, I forget who it is. It's in Nature, so that means it's good. It's in Nature, and it's called Illusions of Understanding in AI. So I need to check it out. Illusions of Understanding. It's it's a really powerful graphic. Figure 1, I think it is, really powerful in the sense of that sort of idea of, you know, you think you might be in this big expansive knowledge space, but turns out you're only in this little quadrant over here, which might be in the middle.
What's the scope of these, like GPT, for example? Like if there's a company, like whatever it is, mining or otherwise, what scope do they have through GPT in providing that context to change or alter the ethical framework or the ring fence that's been put around it by ChatGPT? Like, can they bend the rules of which you can, like if I was to ask it to do something that then provided, oh, it's for a screenplay or whatever, can you provide that context at the organization level to bend those ethical safeguards that OpenAI has embedded?
Yeah, well, that was sort of like, I guess that's a bit of a, like, related to Benno's question, like with the, you know, this eval, can we break these things, you know, in that sense. I like the silly answer silly short answer to your question is like, how much money you got? Like, if you're close to them, you have a good relationship, and you got enough money, they're gonna bring out the enterprise sort of version of the model. They will do the fine tuning with you, for you. You got the money, you got the resources. They'll do whatever. But the base model, like the one that's off the shelf, the off the shelf model, it's kind of already done in that sense. You might be able to play with, say, the input output filtering to let things in. And you might be able to do some fine tuning on the assistant model, the ones that are on the shelf, you know, off the shelf. You can, it's not out of the question sort of thing. You can do the fine tuning on the model already there. I just retrain the last layers to make it more sort of fit to what you need. But some of the qualities, some of the safety mechanisms, the idea is to get them as close as possible to the guts, I guess, of the model, like the, you know, that green box, if you want to call it, so to say, like the heart. If you are trying to, there was a couple of cases with ChatGPT where defamation, for example, or the model was saying sort of like some wacky sort of or incorrect things about someone famous. You can put in a request nowadays saying, hey, I want you to remove me, everything about me in my life from your data set, my name. Okay, that's cool. They've got that in place now, right? But when they do that, every time they do that, something else breaks. So I remove whatever Arnold Schwarzenegger from the data set, and for some reason now my robots that I'm designing are a little bit nicer. They're not as mean. I don't know. They don't have red eyes anymore. You know, something breaks in the model. That's a dumb example, but, you know, maybe you lose a capability. Okay, so these models, the quality of their responses are always up and down and changing through the feedback with the design. But then I take something out and I might lose.
Butterfly effect of what might happen.
Yeah, and like I've noticed it really bad over the last month. It's like something happened. One their sort of, they've had a few IP issues. So like they've been going through this process of like this retraining or removing knowledge in that sense. But when you remove a knowledge, one of your sort of links in your knowledge base, then what else do you lose? Like you if you're thinking like network science, sort of, you remove a big link, an important link. What else falls away? It's also like kind of similar in that sense to like the Brian Arthur stuff. Like, the technology gets replaced, and everything that relied on that piece of info or that knowledge, maybe that also falls away. It's redundant now, and those links are lost. So
what about
bit of a
conflicts?
Yeah.
In conflict in information. Obvious area is law.
Yeah.
So if the knowledge base is being populated, it's more likely to be populated from the United States.
Yeah.
So what we've got is an issue of extraterritorialism embedded within a system over which we have no control of the outcome, which is the antithesis of a legal system.
Does it sound like capitalism?
So what do we do about things like that? That's where it gets serious, right? Worrying about giving out refunds, a company giving out refunds when they would not otherwise is a trivial matter with respect to the US legal system being imposed on everybody else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, private actors, like, that's why there's a big push, I guess, from China, for example. They're doing Baidu and I forget the other one. There's two really big models that they're trying to bring out to sort of, here's our version of the GPT sort of thing. And they've banned
GPT handle culture.
And they've banned the GPT, the access, like, and okay, so like, what are you perpetuating through those systems as well, is what you're sort of saying.
That's one way of doing it. You can put a firewall in, right, and deny access to the knowledge base, right, which is what the Chinese have done. But realistically, that's silly. But at the same time, you need to maintain cultural integrity within geographic areas. At the same time, allowing the United States to learn from China. The United States turns itself off from China. They're probably going to be the losers, right? Intellectually, they're going to be the losers.
Yeah. In
the long run. We know that. Because the innovation not only it comes not very often from eureka moments. It's adaptation more than anything, right?
Yeah. And
if we don't adapt, this for that for this, because the knowledge base won't let us. This is the academic freedom of access to information was designed to overcome that problem, to allow science to be without borders.
Yeah.
But we're creating, if you wish, informational borders.
Yeah.
Which on the one hand we need in the legal system, but on the innovative side we don't need it.
Yeah.
We don't want it there.
I would say, I get it. I get what you're saying, and I agree. And it's really interesting to see like what to think about, like what if I put those the Baidu versus the GPT head to head on like this rule breaking sort of database. Who's breaking the rules? How are they breaking the rules? Which way? It'd be cool to head them. There's a website which is like LLM benchmarking, something dumb like that, or LLM leaderboard, something like that. Check it out if you get the chance. Basically, you're asking questions to models side by side, ranking responses. This is a very human way of doing it, but it's sort of roughly, it kind of gives you a cool idea of where you could go. They're like doing ELO rankings with the chess, right? It's real cool, like what the idea there, but you could think about like, rule breaking sort of responses, which one's more risky or less risky, sort of like a slight tweak to their idea as well. But coming back to what you were saying about these knowledge bases and the constraints there, one thing I don't show here with augmentation is probably another little prong here that says human AI interaction. So like you would notice that the way the outputs that I get from GPT are going to be different to the ones that you get, to the one that Benno gets. The stuff we put in, you know, the input, the sequence that we put in is going to be different. We're sort of in that sense like guiding, we're doing the alignment, we're manually aligning the model to what we're putting in, our knowledge in that sense. So we're trying to like sort of sync up with the model, I guess, you know, pick up what I'm putting down. I'm guiding you to this space. So, you know, the interaction part of it is still relevant. But yeah, I guess it's hard to know, because if you're always coming back to Western ways of thinking or reasoning or assumptions and that are built into the knowledge base, yeah, I don't know.
Hey, Steve.
It'd be interesting. Maybe, yeah, that'd be interesting. Like, just like cultural comparison or interaction, right? Like just straight up, you know, or about, you know, different sort of like East-West sort of topics and sort of seeing different cultures sort of, you know, ranking responses in that sense.
Do you see a risk of it's going to be a battle of knowledge provision? For example, if you want to manipulate or influence society, you make sure that this kind of information is spread out so broadly that it is internalized in the system itself? Or do you think that, for example, through more contextualization, you're able to filter out those risks? And more philosophical question afterwards is, what is your now? What has changed for you in terms of how you understand knowledge, based on now, you know, going deep into this large language modeling? And what do you think is important to put attention to have a better understanding of knowledge?
So the first question was about more. I'll start with the second one because I actually remember it. The second question was, yeah, okay, knowledge. Can you prompt me again? Sorry, I was trying to remember the first one. Now I forgot the second one. Can you?
So I mean, I think what has changed for you in understanding knowledge?
Okay,
now
yeah.
that you, in that sense, and what you think, what is important to think more about in terms of knowledge?
Yeah, so I'm just putting us back to where we were before. Yeah, in that sense, like I'd say like the similarity sort of aspect, I guess, if you think about, you know, fundamentally what we're doing, I send in a query, the user sends in a query here, natural language. I convert it into some sort of embedding and a big long number, many dimensions, thousands, tens of thousands maybe, all these little like different parameters, I suppose, on that one word or token, whatever. And I'm feeding all those words, sort of each get their 10,000 long sort of vectors, embeddings vectors. I'm using those embeddings vectors to then sort of search some knowledge space. Okay, so that's like 10,000 dimensions long. To me, it's like, yeah, the connectivity in that sense. Like, you know, the bigger your dimension set is, the bigger, you know, the more context that you can pull out of something, the more, the stronger you feel something. Like, you know, in the sense of, you know, senses. Like, you know, the more I can sense out of one situation, the more I can use to then search and find links that maybe other people didn't find. Like, I've been super into sort of reading about, you know, neurodiverse stuff, and there was this thing about autism and like the lack of trimming of connections in the autistic brain. I think it's something like the typical brain is sort of trimming something like 60% of the connections they form during the development. Okay, that the autistics don't lose that. So they have sensory connectivity a lot more, right? So the creativity in that space, with those people being able to pull across and see patterns, it's not super surprising to me there. So that the big thing, I guess, was like that, like the links that you can make, and even though I got 10,000 dimensions, right? When I first look at the word, when I'm trying to see if a topic is similar, to another, one area of the literature, political economy to say behavioral economics, I've got to try and condense 10,000 dimensions into 2, maybe on a map. Okay, so I've got to pull out what are the key elements of that 10,000 dimensions, what matters in that comparison between these two knowledge, these two literatures, right? So like the whole, I guess it's been very, for me, it's like, it's learning a lot more about, or thinking more about the human sort of side of this. And this is like the analog equivalent. Like if we could do this, this would be amazing. I don't know, maybe we actually have more than 10,000 dimensions. We probably do. Biological information processing is probably a way more efficient, a lot more parallel, like a lot more concurrent. There's a lot more things that even if I'm not actually, conscious of what's going on, there's a lot of shit going on. And there's probably way more than 10,000 dimensions, or, for what we're sensing, what we're picking up, what the context or whatever that we're bringing out of each sort of interaction. Don't know if that answers your question. But one other thing that I've noticed just from a practical point is that spending longer trying to perfect, it's easier to get something really good, or at least get like a starting point on something, and getting some quality, from basically not doing too much work. But then there's a lot more effort, I guess, going into the finessing, and I don't know if reviewers or sort of critics and things like that, if they're going to become more critical about, because it is so easy to generate text or code, are people going to become more critical of the finer bits and what actually goes in, because garbage in, garbage out. Yes.
So before you were talking about what you get back as a function of what you ask, different people ask different things. Mm-hmm. They'll tap different parts of the knowledge base. So we've got a situation similar to econometrics here. We've got competing models, right? Driven by text. So we got models of model systems yet. So let's put let's generate all of the possible reasonable questions that we get asked the AI system, and look at, where I'm coming from, right? Monte Carlo simulation type situation, right? Where you're just looking at all of the possible things in this distribution. So at the moment, the issue seems to be the human asking the right question. Right?
Yeah, and like
putting aside fencing, right?
Yeah.
So if the human doesn't ask the right question, clearly,
or put in the right content.
So this is garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Classic computing problem.
I have a problem with the word right in that sense. I don't know what right means.
Well, neither do I. That's exactly the problem.
In the end, these are all values.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, for example, before, culture defines values. So one culture says, centralization is the way to go to maintain stability, and the other one says, no, decentralization, because no one has this kind of knowledge to handle the big complex things. And this is a value function that redefines how you look. You look.
Yeah.
But I think this discussion will pop up again. Like all the discussion that you had, for example, in discussion with the Cold War, things around centralization, decentralization, understanding the Soviet Union after World War II, all this decentralization stuff, Hayek stuff on local knowledge, this will re-emerge now with those kind of AI systems.
What I can see is the opportunity here to test the assumptions more rigorously, right? Before we kind of locked them in.
As in to tweak and trial, because the low, because of the accessibility of the prompting as well, like.
usually when we made assumptions before, it's because we didn't know or we didn't have the data right, or it was too complex, the model, right? All this sort of thing, right? We really used assumptions as an excuse to get what we wanted in a lot of cases. Whereas it would appear here there would be an opportunity to have a model system which, given the right starting point, which is a problem, could ask all of the possible questions in this space and then bring that together in some sort of another knowledge base where you can focus the basis. So has that been done yet?
There'll be like there'll be different approaches with that sort of stuff. Like sometimes they'll do like a search retrieval mechanism where like you know, sort of someone might have, again, it's more human led. They might have sort of done an analysis, generated some spreadsheet, some Excel spreadsheet that sort of they've put in their thoughts and thinking about models and different advantages and disadvantages. That'll be more at the moment. We're sort of at that, you know, that's where we're at. The prompt, you know, there's more prompt engineering, the human input to that, the engineering sort of effort there, and like in that sense.
What do you do afterwards? Because you see you're mapping it, you make a distributional function, and then so what do you do with that?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you maybe about I think one thing that you can do with that, you can maybe identify where are problems. Like if you look at the tails, this could be an issue, or if you look at where the mean is, for example, that could also indicate our problems. So where there's a lot of things accumulated and where it's very dispersed, there we need to pay attention what that means in terms of biases, societal issues.
When you don't get convergence, when you don't get convergence from AI models or comparing models in
when
general.
you pick up outlier situations,
Yes.
right? Typically what will happen is a set of standard tests and econometrics to do that, right? To find that, to see that you've done that. Right? But here, you know, to do it when you're just comparing a couple of distributions of some variables is quite easy. To do it when you're asking many questions of the knowledge base, it's another matter. Perhaps a way to overcome the issue with legal advice from an AI, right? Is exactly that. Is the answer to this consistent with the knowledge base of the courts or something, right?
Yeah.
Which is what the lawyer and the solicitor does anyway.
Yeah,
what
and
the judge does, particularly in case.
Well, they also do consensus, like they do group sort of stuff, like, you know, in the sense, I know the judge is one person, but, you know, in the sense that, you know, another approach like Lang chain, if you've heard of that, that one is about chaining, you know, this one's a companion model, like two things sitting beside each other, but there's multi-agent, you know, like in the sense of like, you know, pairing teams of agents to think and critique something. You know, here's a document, can you come at it from all these different angles sort of thing, and then give me output like that sort of consensus approach as well.
I think in terms of the law stuff, the important thing is, I think you will quickly get solutions, for example, for criminal law. I think where you got really problems is for some compensation.
Civil law,
civil law, tort, all these kind of things there. It's going to be super messy. What do you weigh? What's relevant? And there is no clear ethics guideline how you need to do it sometimes. And that's usually, you know, one of the important things that you need to solve. If you look at primitive societies, these are the two things that they solve. In an exchange, for example, what happens if I hurt someone else? Or what happens if I violate the rules in that sense? You know? That would be very interesting from a legal perspective to see how that area is going to be solved.
I'm just training it on precedent.
Yeah.
That's all you've really got to go
on. Is there a question over there? Is it no? All good? Oh, yes? Sorry.
No, I just thank you for presenting this and for teaching me, because I have to use it for my thesis. But I think it's the same skeptical that we had in the history in the past. I had one lesson with Benno, and he talked about the machinery of decision making of Herbert and so on. So I think we are like kind of like using this new tool, new technology, also like kind of like seeing of how to use it for decision making. So like in that sense, you also say we had large language models since many times ago. I think the novelty of this ChatGPT is that you really have it in easy words, like, right, that we have it like you can ask you anything and we'll give you an answer anyway. So
very accessible.
Yeah,
in that sense,
accessible.
yeah.
Indeed, this machine of decision making they did in the past was mostly for the economists, more like a niche. Like, what is for them? Because okay, there is this ChatGPT Plus. Okay, you pay a little, but what is this process learning from us? Because actually, when they programmed, they put already all the information they had. Like I don't know, they put papers, they put I don't know formulas, anything. But when we ask a question, we want an answer from the knowledge that has been put in. The problem with the old version was that it was just until 2021, right? So that it was a little bit outdated. But like if it interacts with us and you say that it learns from us, but then you say also can get worse, then why can't they stop it from learning from us? Or like, do you think it's better? Because like if you say that if we give it bad information, then it will take it and then it will change again the existing information it already has.
Yeah, so that was an example of like, so it was the point I was trying to get there is more like the representativeness of your data, like and sort of, people using it. So say I've got a certain, subset of people, criminals or whatever, they are using one platform and I just happen to be training my data based on human interactions. Some of them will get caught in that process and I might start seeing some criminal sort of emergent properties, or emergent properties of criminality sort of emerging. It's not to say that we're going to be just focusing on training criminal data. Some people have already gone and done that. There's a malicious GPT, which is like the dark web sort of learning. So like, you can do it. But like, where was it going with that? So it's essentially, you can get this sort of like these feedbacks. You will get feedbacks. But the process, so say I have like a ChatGPT, they've got millions of users. Okay, I might have 100,000 criminals, maybe. How do I determine which ones from that interaction data is the criminal ones, and how do I remove that? How can I can't be the scale of this problem means that we have to use automated tools to.
Because
moderate.
It will say I'm not allowed to tell you that.
Yes.
So like ChatGPT will never tell people criminal things to do, like because you always like it's kind of ethical. This like if you ask to the ChatGPT how to kill somebody, it will tell you I'm not allowed to give you that because they have this ethical ban, which is also right in that sense. Or how is it gonna be ChatGPT criminal if criminal people ask questions? Because it will always be banned, no? They have this like ethical ban. They will never say
like this. But like it's a fence, right? Like if you look at and it's paled, right? Like it's a really good analogy here. Is like it's palings, but there's gaps, right? It's like it's the same thing as the Swiss cheese model. If you've ever heard of that, like you've got the accident causation. I put up these barriers. I put up the fence. I've got palings there, and I'm blocking it. Okay, but there's still gaps that things can get through, and people will be actively trying to exploit those gaps. So I can do all of this, these guardrails. I can do, maybe it makes my model worse. So if I try to make it super safe, maybe it's not a very useful model. Okay, it's so safe, but it doesn't. The guardrail is too tight, so I can't move from out of that little bubble that the knowledge or the safety training has put me in. So maybe a more open model that is maybe a little bit more dangerous is more sort of productive in that sense. Which then that tells me like this another thing that you learn, like restriction of the knowledge base, like, or the training data. If I remove some bad, hurtful parts of Reddit, I remove maybe the relationship to the good side of it. So love and hate, you know, that idea, they're very close. Okay. If I remove the hate, does love become, I don't know, what is love?
What degree of love becomes hate?
Yeah. Well, like happiness without sadness, like, you know, like, I don't know, it's a dumb example, but the idea.
Well, we know from history what's happened there, because we have examples where regimes have restricted data.
Yeah.
We have one
and
at
knowledge.
the moment,
Yes.
but we had an extreme one in the middle of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it destroys societies. We know that.
So that's it's a cool thing to think about, you know, that, you know, where, you know, again, knowledge and sort of like, it speaks to me very highly of like, the context of the individual and the person at that time. So something that Thomas Schelling was exploring in the 70s around racial segregation, the words he's using in the paper, whoa, no way, very PC, you know, you wouldn't be able to touch it. But at the time, he's actually making a really good case for, you know, a good push towards more to less segregation, right? But it was a very topical thing at the time. He also had all that sort of contextual sort of, you know, his socio sort of historical sort of context that he's in, the country he's from, the you know, his family background, the institution he's working at, things like that. So you know, the context surrounding his knowledge database restricts him or pushes him in certain areas and makes some things more or less acceptable. Talking about racial segregation using naughty words, which was okay back in that day. Now, if I trained, you know, I have the same sort of Thomas Schelling. Everything else is the same, you know, like running a counterfactual, everything else, the background, everything else, except now it's just 20, 30 years later. I don't know. What is he talking about? Is he still interested in segregation? So, because it already was sort of half solved, I guess. Was it solved if he didn't, you know, or is it, it's not even solved? So I don't know. It's interesting to think if you take that link out, or that particular link in that particular time, from the knowledge base, this overall one, what happens to the rest of the knowledge base? How does it reorganize afterwards? So really cool, interesting stuff. I'm aware about an hour in, so I'm probably just going to keep pushing through at this point. So I don't think we're even back at 19 yet. No, we're not even back at 19. Now this is, again, companion models. There's a couple of different approaches here. You know, like, do I have this knowledge base and do I give it particular actions? You know, I'm sort of gating it in that sense with actions it can take based on the knowledge you have, or do I remove the action space and let it run free? I don't know. This one is for grounding, okay, to a knowledge base. So I give it some action set. I ground it in my knowledge base. I want it to be a bit more grounded and aligned in that sense, because this is an enterprise sort of idea here. But for, you know, going on Tony's idea, or going back, creative problem solving or things like that, maybe we need to remove maybe the link to the action space, or add on some different knowledge bases, or combine different ones, sort of thing, depending on what your application is, right? Now, this is just sort of goes through in a bit more detail. I'm not going to really go into it. You can flick through the slides just about what each of these boxes has. So knowledge base, it has some sort of files, or your existing model or database file. Sorry, your model file, which is, you know, GPT is about 128, 130 gig. You've got that knowledge base, which is your sort of baseline one. You add on these, the external knowledge base documents, and then you define some sort of actions that it can take. You know, look at this data, generate something else. Depends on what the application is what you put into these actions, and also the guardrails specific to those actions as well. A guardrail for, you know, checking facts there. Is that really obvious, or does it really even make sense to check facts in generating user intent? Is there a right or a wrong? Is there a fact there? User intent. I don't know. Yes, in some sense, but maybe it's a little bit unclear. So some of them will be more specific to particular actions than others. And syntax looks like knowledge engineering. Again, this is their approach, quite rule-based. Now, why rule-based? Because rules might give you a bit more interpretation or interpretability, a bit more control in that sense. And it makes us feel like we're not as out of control if we wrote the thing. And we know that the steps that it can take, possible steps. But you do that and you constrain in some way. So there's trade-offs.
What would be a good alternative to a rule-based system that is doable in the near future?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if you ever do, like, but maybe it's just about a different, like, this is, when I think this is like 70s, 80s rule-based, right? It's just a different, I think, do we want to get away from rule-based thinking? I don't know, because like logic, you know, philosophy, logic, thinking your way through things has been like what has been so good for us for millennia and all that. Like, you know, logically thinking through things, having justifications, maybe it's just what we need for us to feel okay to interact with these things.
You will never be able to fully get the entire possibility set with rules.
No. There's rule mining.
So
there is rule mining.
Like a brute force.
Yeah.
In that sense.
It was like the open, what was it called? Open something. Open mind. No.
Clearly, you guys have never written an indeterminate loop and stopped the computer.
Yeah. No, I have. I've done that many times. What is it called? There's this work that Push Sing with Marvin Minsky. God, what is it called? Don't know what it's called. Go check it out. Just search up his name and look up for like open knowledge base or something. ConceptNet. The idea that they've had is like mining the web or using crowdfunding workers to sort of define sort of common sense rules or you know, almost like mining rules from the web or from crowd-funded people putting it in. Mum is a woman, and she birthed me. I was, these very, you know, common sense rules that we don't even talk about because it's so dumb to talk about. You know, it's common sense.
Assumed knowledge.
Yeah, it's assumed knowledge. Yeah, so. That's the approach those guys went with the mining of that. You know, they're saying, okay, this is like really, and maybe that's like part of the human developmental process is like learning those rules through experimentation
And cultural learning.
Yeah, so
where they come from.
You know, there, smack on the back. You know, oh, you can't ask that. Pinch on the leg, sort of things like that. So, you know, maybe that's another approach. I'd be, I don't know what's beyond rule-based systems. But like we keep coming back to maths. So like that's logic, or rules. Like, so does that tells me maybe we won't get away from it, but then.
That's an explosive. Explosive strategy here. It's logic, but it's explosive.
It's kind of interesting, right?
So what do you mean if you are more example in that sense? What does it mean then?
You just let it. You give up control.
Yeah,
and you react. So you got to be quicker.
Control, but the question is, what do you need to program then? So what is it? Is it, you know, what is it then?
Infinitesimal
experimentation
simulation.
Yeah, experimentation, closing the loop. Yeah.
If you think about the developing brain, what happens is it goes berserk and builds connections everywhere, and then acculturation basically trims it by the time the kid's a 9-year-old. So that's the rules.
That's crazy.
Right? And we know that constrains our thinking, right? And you know, we'd like to have autistic kids, the increase in the number of autistic kids may well be good for thinking outside the box in the future. The question we're going to ask is, do we want an autistic system or do we want an acculturated system, right? If we want an autistic system, that is a system that verges on hallucinating, can go anywhere, right? This is good when it comes to innovation. This is what we want, right? But then we can't allow companies to use that to make decisions on how to treat people, right? Because there are cultural norms and ethics involved. So we have a dichotomy. Right? Now, in the computer company I work for, it became such an issue when they put in enterprise resource planning systems with workflow, right, rules, that the skunk works, the labs refused to connect their computer systems to the corporate network. It got that bad, the argument. This was in the mid-80s. Right? So this problem of the constraints of acculturation on computer-based thinking has been around for a long while. So we're either going to make up our mind whether we want AI and what we want it for. Right? And putting fencing is silly if you want to innovate. Just like trying to bash certain sort of thinking out of our children is silly. Right? We know today that's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah,
we've gone on since the Victorian days of a set of rules how children behave.
Yeah, but it is, like you said, you know, it is like that. What's the other form of that long debate or argument is like the was it exploit or explore? You know, it's just
exactly.
That,
well, of course, a corporation will exploit.
And
we know
it's
that.
Hayek
So
again.
the difference, for example, would be you introduce a value function, and then the person acts based on the value function without setting the rules. So then you know, so for example,
like principles.
Well, yeah, I mean, for example, if you think about your kids, you can't, for example, you can't do an if and then for them and have this kind of code book of 3,000 pages of if and then. You try to give them what you think are valuable values. And then you hope
which is what society's founded on.
Exactly. Then you hope that they actually do something good with those. And that's how, again, that's how social science in general would look at that problem. And that's different to this kind of rule-based system approach to try to control as much as possible in that sense. And then again, the problem is with values, and values are subjective.
And they are the end. They are the end goals as well.
The end product. Yeah.
At the end of the day, do we want a democratic AI or an autocratic AI?
Yes, exactly. That goes back into this centralization, decentralization discussion.
Where does reasoning come in?
Well, reasoning is a big problem. I think that's something that behavior economics is constantly fucking up all the time. Is reasoning is often an ex post strategy once you figure out how things go.
That's an excuse.
Well, no, that's just you write it up. Like, so let's say you like to cook, you're creative, and you start throwing things into it, and you taste it, and then it works. The recipe afterwards gives you the chance that somebody's able to replicate maybe your palate experience. But it doesn't explain you why did you throw pepper into it at that moment in time.
But at that moment in time, you still have
this kind of rationality is just then a huge problem. Or all these things that we build up, consistent behavior, whatever you call it, becomes a huge problem then.
Because you're talking about exposed reasoning, but at the time when you make a decision, then you might have, you must have a reason why you want to add salt in it.
Exactly, and you have a good reason because you made the decision.
What is this reason? Is it intuition?
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, sensory feedback.
Let me talk differently about the concept of logic in that sense. Because then you want to understand the process. you want to open your think aloud protocol, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
In that sense, but not the stupid way how we're doing it, not behaving.
Yeah.
And we define rationality. That's
Yeah.
No, I mean it's.
Yeah, great.
I think it's just frustrating. Hugely frustrating.
Yeah, the way I like to the analogy I like is like the quantum, like the cat, the Schrodinger's cat, and like, or the the one where it's Wigner's friend in the lab observing the cat, which is another step beyond that. But the cat, like, you don't actually, like you're saying, like, it's until you've made the final observation, the cat's both dead or alive. I actually don't really know what was the reason, the factors, until I have this observation or final sort of recollection or account post sort of ex ante sort of, or sorry, ex post sort of account, and I've got to try and pull the strings together. It's not until I make that observation that I actually know what was going on, I guess, in that sense, trying to make sense of it. But then, what about those things that take longer to make sense of? I don't really know why I did that right now, but 2 weeks later. So then, that the decoherence time is interesting to look at.
And in the meantime, the decisions of AI will be tested by the courts, and the courts will win.
I suppose it's like, same with like quantum in that sense. Like, you have, going into that measurement, you have measurement probabilities. Well, I don't actually exactly know what the outcome is going to be. I have some measurement. Generally speaking, I'll have measurement sort of probabilities of, say, like, I add salt, it'll taste like this, or usually when I've tried to do something similar, I've done it like this. So maybe I did that. That increases my measurement probability for that explanation.
But now your argument is also somehow a bit reductionistically that what about emergent properties? It's not so easy. Well, I mean, you could prove something, maybe get some of them by running it 1,000 times, 20,000 times, and be able to map it properly. Then you get some emergent properties out of that. But
it's entirely it's entirely random and uncertain. So, like, while my recipe for getting my salt gives me, that's one of my things where you think about, like,
that's a guideline. That's a guide, for something. But then why are there really good chefs and not so good chefs?
Yeah.
What makes them different?
Experience and built up rules. Experience is built up rules.
Yeah, I don't know what you can justify just by telling people, if you add salt, this is I don't know. I'm not so sure whether this guideline will make everyone the same kind of chef. So when you can teach people the same kind of way of using a method, but people will use it in a different way or a different level of creativity in that sense.
Yeah.
Well, that means we need to again meet us the process about what you call it reasoning. Okay, fine. You call this. You can extend the notion of reasoning.
But surely the problem only really comes about with AI when we do the silly thing of allowing AI to define the rules. That's where reality disconnects from humanity, from where AI disconnects from humanity.
Well,
that's
I mean,
issue.
If these models, though, are like fundamentally, like, are they not like? Well, they are machine that they've trained.
Let me give you an example, but and you've heard it before. It's the example of the police system in Eastern United States, who used a knowledge base on the existing criminal systems for stop and searches. And we then, out of that, got the Black Lives Matter issue, right, which went to court and found that the system was complicit in the subjugation of certain types in the community.
So
right?
it was very
what the computer system did was perfectly correct. It applied the rules according to what AI defined, right? The result was we ended up with dead black men, right? So that's a case where it was bizarre that a police group would do that. I think they did it out of laziness.
But, like, in that sense, like, it, the AI it did what it was meant to do,
Did it perfectly well.
Yeah, and it learnt the rules that the humans
Yeah,
did, and it replicated what the humans did. So
trouble is, it didn't understand ethics.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's like blind repetition, sort of. Yeah, parrot, statistical parrot.
And that's what happens when autocrats get hold of systems, right? We know that. We've got examples of that from the 20th century, multiples thereof.
Yeah. And it'll be really interesting, like, again, because, you know, we know, like, with all, you know, the way that you interact with these things, you know, the models, you can bias them with say, like, you know, there's a slide back there where, you know, prompt injections. So if I can get in between you and the system before it gets to, you know, if I can get between here, somewhere here with the user question before he gets to the LLM, or if I can intercept before it gets back to you, I can play around with that. So if I can manipulate information going in / out, you know, maybe it's like kind of similar, or, you know, an analogy maybe to like Cambridge Analytica sort of situation. You know, they'll like, this is a new vector, information vector attack. This is a new vector of attack here. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's not new, but it's you know, the scale of it is definitely new. Of that vector. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, like, you know, because if you know, at the moment, like, there is a lot of role playing is picked up with these models, like, you know, again, you're teaching it, you're literally teaching it, assistant fine tuning to play the role of an assistant. Then there's all the data on the web where there's these little roles of teacher or mentor or whatever, student asking questions, things like that. All these roles sort of built in that the model has been learning and picking up to play play roles in that sense. So why does that matter? Well, you know, you can get to the state where you get this thing that's like a yes sort of AI, right? Like, aligning, yes, it's an alignment problem, but aligning to who? If it aligns to everyone, you might align to some bad maladaptive intentions, some criminal alignment. We've gone for all true alignment in every case, maybe, but then we're also aligning to the bad people as well in that sense. So, yeah, I guess, you know, the role playing stuff.
We're getting progress. So this book we discussed in the reading group, alignment problem, which has a huge amount of information on trying to deal with this issue of biases. And so if you're interested in that, you can look at, you know, stories around different scholars who work on it. You can look at the work of those scholars. So there's a lot of activity in that space.
Cool. Just going on this picture here. Again, we talked, like, the last one was a bit, you know, very classical rule, right? Like 70s, 80s sort of stuff, like, you know, very like strict, maybe quite sort of rigid, maybe, I don't know. The OpenAI, this architecture they're showing here, essentially, like, it's a recast of the old one. It's just an observation or a companion model, pretty much, and letting it use tools, right? Observation, sort of companion model. A lot of the key thing out of this slide just to look at is, like, the absolute importance and, like, you know, the extreme power that you can get from having multiple language calls before you spit back an output. So what do I mean by that? Again, the guardrail one showed you where I look at the user intent and the bot intent. Okay, so I have the user sends in a query. Okay, before it goes to the language model, I actually, you know, with the actual question, I send it to a language model just to tell me what was the intent behind that question. Okay, then I send it to the actual main model, the master model, to give me the response. Okay, this one here does user question in, straight to the model, and then observe the output. Should I improve it? If so, I'll continue the loop. Otherwise, send the final response back. So what am I trying to say there? ChatGPT is like one API call. Okay, I send a question response back straight away. they do have this observation in there for some of the more advanced models, GPT-4o. Okay, but if you personally want your outputs, your models, your enterprise applications, platforms, whatever, to see massive improvement in quality, like pre-post API calls is very useful. So that's just what we're saying with that slide there, more than anything. I briefly talked about GPTs before, and Anna Maria, you mentioned how, like, with these things, like the accessibility of these models.
Yeah.
So, there's more scholars coming to play with AI because of how easy prompt engineering is. Previously, when I was using agent-based modeling, like the traditional, rule-based, agent-based modeling that we think net logo,
Yeah.
I had to do so much work to code this thing to sort of like, and while there was, there's little improvements to make it more accessible, there's still quite a bit of learning for the user to then be able to use it properly. GPT, you can, or like, the large language models, the prompt engineering, it's really easy. I can, again, if you look at ChatGPT, you can see that there's a little like edit button. I submit a prompt and I don't like the output. I can go back, edit it, try something different. I can keep doing that. That's like what Tony was talking about, this experimentation, this scaling up of that experimentation. I try A and B prompt and just keep iterating. Prompt engineering, yes, quite easy, but with this agent architecture that OpenAI has brought out, and I think recently Claude is going somewhere similar, is that you can actually create these like GPTs, like these special domain AI models, which you give it a name or a description of what it should do. You give it, the instructions. Maybe you upload some knowledge. Then like that's good to go. That's it. That's what you do. Like that's the programming. Stupid. Super easy, right? Like it's like code, no code in that sense, which is great. So that's awesome. Now an example here is like recently we on another project we built one of these to classify sort of they ran a big survey a couple of years ago during COVID, asking people, what are you doing in the next week or next month or next year? What can you think about? What sort of things do you have to look forward to? Or what happened in the last week? What happened in the last month? What happened in the last year? Okay, so activities. You can imagine you ask 50,000 people and you ask them that question without much else, sort of other context. There's no examples or anything like that. Okay, so people's heads go whichever way. Some people are like, I walked the dog. I had to, I was doing assignments, whatever. So lots of diversity in those responses. So there was 50,000 of them. We wanted to classify, what are people, how are we linking our motives behind these actions? So I'm feeling lonely. Do I then go out and see friends more? Do I see that? Or is it a negative feedback? I'm feeling lonely. I don't see friends. I don't plan to see friends. So now I'm more lonely a year later. So there's sort of like feedback and motivation behind taking action. If us 3 people, we're going to go through 50,000 responses, it would take forever. So we developed like a code book, just like you would with a human team, a thematic code book. We gave it to the humans and we gave it to the AI, and we even did a test on the sort of reliability. It was great. Essentially, we just give the AI load in here, upload the file. Here's the code book that we had. Social activities is under discretionary values or something like that. In the instructions, whenever the user submits a query, check your database, your file that we uploaded, and classify it according to that structure. Make sure you stay grounded in that code book. It was like super simple, took like a day. And like, yeah, you get a bit of veering and whatnot when I was playing around with temperature settings, which is, you know, randomness, creativity, but you know, pretty solid for a day's work. That's all you need to do nowadays. So again, just harp on that point that Anna Maria made, good point, like around accessibility. And these things are quite easy to work with too. If you haven't had the chance, maybe you try making a bot that writes your grocery lists. I don't know. Or maybe you're into methods and you want a tool to sort of help you read through papers and highlight, bring out structured tables of methods per paper or something like that. You know, there's these little helpers that we can develop quite easily to help us achieve really domain specific tasks. So we take that general problem solver, the big, you know, knowledge base, and we wrap some specific rules or instructions, prompt engineering, data and knowledge, and we get a domain specialists, say in extracting the methods, the research methods, the data collection methods from a paper, giving it to you in a format you want. Or maybe it's a slide generator for engaging talks or something, I don't know. Try it out. So prompt engineering, yes, we talked a bunch about that. Again, there's different methods. I'll let you go through it all. Those ones here, we've, you know, been touching on some risks and benefits, so I'm not going to get into that again. Really, and some of your better sort of practices, again, just have a look through them. Now we're into this synthetic data sort of landscape. So again, a lot of these conversations we've already had are going to be really good for this next stage. So, like, you know, this part about, you know, we're trained on the web, the human internet, the human data. There's a bunch of data, and in that process of training and on that human data, language models might be then learning some sort of reflections or patterns or value perspectives within that data embedded there. Learning them and using them for their outer sample predictions or, you know, inference time, basically. So human data, human web, we've trained the model on that. We have some opportunity here to then use some social science methods to sort of actually analyze and understand their behaviors, which is cool. So that's our nice little motivation there. At the same time, you know, there's this, I guess, thinking about humans versus AI, and you know, say I go out and ask humans, population of humans, some questions about you know, taboo or sensitive topics. You know, I can't control for their bias in responding, the social desirability bias, right? They might want to not seem like a dick, so they don't answer like a dick. Or they might think that I think something is taboo. So, you know, they say they don't do it, or they don't want to talk about it. They might even conceal what they really, you know, what they really feel in the first place. Or maybe they don't even know. Speaking to Benno's, you know, point a little bit earlier about, you know, or that quantum things. I haven't figured out the reason yet, or I'm still not quite sure, sort of thing. Agents might not have as much of an issue there to talking about some of these issues, given that we have some safety mechanisms to guard us from talking about certain topics, yes. But if we can get around those, then generally speaking, you might actually see some sort of more openness or candid responses. A question that I ask a person, which might make them shut down and recoil or not want to talk to me anymore, AI might not have a problem with answering them. You know, might be happy to go ahead and proceed on that basis. So there's probably a little bit of an opportunity there around that sort of sensitive, challenging topics as well to learn more. Given that we have these human sort of characteristics and emergent properties from these models, we can use them in an outer sample domain and learn about some of the stuff that we don't have as much data on. But if we don't have the data on sensitive topics, maybe AI has no knowledge about sensitive topics or what to say. So good thing is that Reddit has some really deep threads with a lot of sensitive topics. The web is an anonymous place, or mostly it's an anonymous place where people can go and do some crazy, wacky shit. So, I think it was the head of Google at this time, or what's his name? Varian. Hal Varian mentioned like Google is a place of intentions, right? Like the data that is shown, Google search, it's an intention, right? To go out and go to the shop. So, a bit of anonymity on the web. There's a lot of sort of weird, wacky behaviors happening. So you might actually get quite a bit of data there already, which is good. So sensitive topics, challenging topics, maybe AI is a strong point there. So synthetic data is exactly what it sounds like, the real world data, trying to synthetically generate or recreate some of that, right? There's a few different approaches or methods. Federated learning's had quite a bit of popularity lately. It's sort of just basically very, very simply put a way for you to sort of train a model within someone's environment and then transfer the weights of that model out of that environment. So data, like it's useful for situations like health data where I can't actually take the data out of that platform. I can go train a model within that environment and then take the model weights and so on outside of the environment and use it to regenerate data that is statistically speaking similar to the data it was trained on. So essentially, I can train my model on this real data. I can take that model, take it out, and use it to generate new data that is similar to the original one without giving away into that sort of privacy concerns there. Large language models have emerged more recently as this sort of like another alternative in that sense to federated learning. So rather than the statistically sort of training and learning or learning to recreate the statistical properties directly, you can prompt the model with, the profile of a person who is 50, male, whatever, and see if it recreates the data that you're expecting, rather than sort of training and generating based off that raw sort of direct one-to-one sort of recreation in that sense. You can, of course, also fine-tune language models. So that gets us back closer to probably the federated learning approach, learning to reproduce or learn and reproduce existing statistical patterns in the data. You might lose some of that privacy preserving sort of benefits of synthetic data in that case though. So if I'm fine-tuning my language model on some human data, then it's probably going to spit it back to me later, right? If I don't remove the names or whatever from the data before I do my training. Federated learning, they've already done that sort of process of abstraction, I guess, in the data, so minimizing the risk there a little bit. So essentially, again, just recreating or artificially generating data that mimics some real-world data, but doesn't actually require us to directly expose the underlying data in that sense. Ethics, we talked a little bit about, this digital profiling, stereotyping, the representation of the data and the bias there. Like if I, speaking to Benno's point with that, Moya brought up about, it's hard to actually generate an image of a submissive male, right? Like data representation, there was not many, situations where we had in our training set a submissive male. Okay, so when I ask it to create one, what's the representativeness? Oh God, what is the representation of that data in that sense? Like, if we've only got a handful of images of submissive men, well, it's probably going to recreate those ones pretty much in that sense, if not exactly, right? And also opens us up to, say, like the stereotyping side of things. So you would have seen some studies of like, okay, generate some images of the a typical person from each state in the US. And based on models training, it'll spit out some, Texas cowboy in a hat sort of situation. So it's just mindful that, those sort of ethical or sort of like biases so also slip into the synthetic data potentially generated by language models as well.
It can be interesting to observe the dynamics in terms of ethics, because I already have people approaching me, for example, if you use SurveyLam, do you need ethics clearance in that sense? What are the guidelines to that one? And the argument was, maybe the question itself can cause harm, or the insights out of the synthetic data can cause harms to society. But then you can say, look, I mean, you can write a conceptual paper without data that can actually harm society too, in that sense. So where is the boundary?
Yeah.
I just hope that ethics does not go into this kind of space. We work with
too heavily.
Too heavily. Because that's going to be where is the end?
At some point it will need to, though.
Anymore to write a conceptual paper how you look at the world, or to explore critical questions in that sense. So
I think at some point you're going to need to, though. Like
it's a very difficult question in that sense. I think ethics at the moment has not yet put attention on this artificial data, synthetic data in that sense, but sooner or later,
because our representation of context is
those kind of discussions will emerge too in that sense.
Their reward, their motivation is to move down that path. They're motivated to move down that path.
Well, they want to stop us before we get there.
It's when. They already require us to get ethics for Monte Carlo simulations.
Yeah, so like,
and nothing's more synthetic than that rubbish.
So yeah, it'll be, but in the same sense, like, well, there was one study like literally last week or something. And I've been saying this shit for ages, so it's great to see that this thing finally came out. If you say please and thank yous to these models, the responses are better. Like they put in more effort. It's the same thing with a human. Someone's a dick, probably not going to do your best work. Rest. In that sense, like. So yeah, why?
Do they have a character? No.
I guess if you get them to play the role, it depends. Yeah, depends what the system instructions.
But like somebody also told me that if you ask the same question on your all different ChatGPT, you will all get different. Like let's say the answer is the same, but maybe they will frame it differently for you, right?
Depending on what your memories are in your chat history. Yeah. So like, really good example of that. Like last week. I was asked the model. We had 3 of us or 4 of us just being dumb. My friends were just making, know that I love this stuff, so they were just making a bit of fun of it. And we've all asked the model, should we go out for dinner together, or should we just get some food in? And same situation, literally same words across all of us. I've tried mine like 5 different times, like literally just regenerate every single time to stay in. Based on whatever like my history was, maybe you're working too late or something, stay in. The others had a bit more mix, right? But like mine, based on my chat, like was like, oh hey, you probably need to just take a break or something. Maybe I've talked to it. Maybe I've talked to it about some bad stuff or some.
Or open AI just what shares in Uber Eats.
Yeah. Who knows? Like, and that's again, that's another thing. Like with the that vector of attack, the prompt injections. Okay, if I came in and I say, okay, I'm thinking, I agree, let's go with Uber Eats. What if KFC is somehow capable enough to get in between my conversation and my query? Okay, the Zinger box, you should
please don't give them ideas.
Yeah.
Because then they will start putting ads on ChatGPT as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't be that surprised if it's already happening.
Can I just ask something a little bit more pressing? And that is, I've just gone through an ethics process to use existing data where ethics does its usual things. What questions are you going to ask of the data? And then of course there's a requirement, if you're going to ask new questions, you've got to resubmit your ethics. Now, under a ChatGPT situation, this changing of the question is very dynamic, right? So we've now got a rule-based system imposed over the top of the dynamics of our research, which is a new problem. We could put up with it when we could write research questions such that they were a little flexible, right? But now we don't want flexibility anymore. We want to be initially flexible and then become more specific. And we're going to ask not 10 questions like we typically do. We're going to ask thousands, hundreds of thousands. If we're going to use object agents, we're going to ask millions.
Yeah, it's going to be really hard to like the wording around that, and then you're going to have to think about pairing, like companion models with humans, being like, is this the wording of this text fundamentally changing?
The thematic analysis, which is a black box, right?
Cool.
It's a criticism of like going back to the academic point in terms of getting ethics and getting approval. If you look at fairly like modern psychology, like the Milgram experiment, all of these things that today would never pass ethics. But back then, with probably an integral piece of research and informed our way of thinking. With synthetic data, does that not pose an opportunity to do those kinds of experiments? But then the ethics have to be involved in some spot, perhaps to evaluate the initial data set that you're giving it, but should not then consider the ethics of what you're asking the data set. It becomes like at what point do you introduce ethics, if at all? But like synthetic data provides an opportunity to streamline what have been very monumental findings without being locked by ethics, like in the 60s.
That's a great point. There's really good point.
It's possible, as you say, ethics could turn around and say you might get an answer that we don't like.
Yeah, well, exactly. Which is
what the last thing we want. We don't want them involved in outcomes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I guess like the point, the reason.
Have you rerun?
Yeah, do them now.
By the way, have you rerun the Milgram program?
I haven't, but I've seen those papers out there already.
Yes,
oh, really?
Yeah, they were super quick on it. Super quick. Very good.
Yeah, they get the same result.
Go check it out. To be honest, I didn't get past just seeing that they did it, and I kicked myself. I didn't want to read it. So. It was like in the first couple months of these. Like this was like late.
You sent
it
me
was quite highly. Bins and Schulz. It was in not science, finance. So yeah, the reason I guess just quickly before we move on, the reason I brought up this the pleases and the thank yous in terms of ethics is because part of their argument in that paper was saying, well, yep, you can get improved performance. Yep, cool. They're trying to rationalize ex post with explanations. And well, one of their points, which I thought was really interesting, was like, well, hey, should we not hope for this to be the case? Because if I'm learning to interact, same with the COVID case, if I'm learning to interact with a model and ordering it around, do this, do that, like the Borat, like King of the Castle, like, do this, do that. I don't use my pleases and my thank yous. Well, what am I going to then transfer out into the real world? That one of their arguments was around that feedback. Like, what does this mean for society? Like how we treat each other and interact with each other. Well, the good point is that language models also like you to be nice, so you should probably keep that act up. So that was, that was their nice point, but it's a valid point. Like, and now connecting to ethics, okay, we're going to get to a point where these models have a rich representation of self, or it has rich enough to be able to have some opinions or values itself. At that point, do you not? And I put them in the Milgram. If it feels it, if it says it feels it, Like, and it's the same thing with subjective feelings. If you say you feel something, I can't say you don't feel it.
Question, what's the concept of artificial?
Yeah, I don't know. So it's Vignum D. God, don't know her name. Vignum something. Vignum starts with a D last name. She does a lot in that sort of AI ethics space. She so yeah, if you Virginia Dignam, yes, yes. So that she's you know, maybe have a look at some of her stuff. There's probably other authors.
Virginia, sorry,
I think it will be interesting.
Dignam.
I think it will be interesting to check whether you go that line. Can you push such a system to commit suicide?
Yeah, it's on.
That's, for example, that would be.
But they said there was a case of somebody who died because of
not a human. Not a human.
No.
With the AI system, more or less, you know.
We already know that humans can
can
drive other humans using social media, right?
That the AI system is not functioning.
So it's a new perspective on reciprocity.
I mean, it'd be cool to take like Asimov's 3 laws and see if you can get it to break it.
Yeah, for example.
You know. Yeah, but you know, it's interesting to think then also about like. So like, if we took the assumption that like classical or like neoclassical economists took in around like selfishness of humans, if we took that, if we just, I know it's received criticism around like, you know, we want to help each other and we have bias towards, if we just take it just for what it was at that point and we assume that people are selfish and like, you know, self-interested, you know, if we put a bunch of these AI models in a simulation and completely self-interest, but your objective is to survive, you need someone else, you know, like, you know, you're not going to be able to survive by yourself. Or, you know, maybe the rule is you need someone else to survive. Okay. So then, you know, the AI models, even if they do have this bias towards self-interest and self-preservation, might actually begin to actually you know, collaborate in that sense. So yeah, I guess it's interesting that you can really start to like play all these things out, and because of the accessibility through the prompt engineering and you know, in that sense, you can start to really scale up and test a bunch of things which you know, previously maybe you couldn't have, and on Benno's advice, it's like do it in the next year or two, otherwise an fix comes in.
I just have a question about this accessibility, like on the other part of the knife, let's say, because on one side it's accessible to everybody, even if people don't know how to use it, they kind of get it. But on the other side, to log in, you need a password, you know, to your data, you need to put your like I didn't know so much. For example, there was this breach about Facebook years ago that they sell data, everybody knows that, everybody still uses it. But what about ChatGPT selling data? Like, do you know that?
Same thing.
Do we know in which ways our data is used? Because I remember when at the beginning I started using it, they told me, oh, never put your personal data because they will know, I don't know, it's, or like.
Yeah, no, it's a big issue. And like, yeah, so they're, but I mean, that's a continuation of like the larger trend with the big tech, right? Like the power or the implicit sort of signing over of power, right? Like just giving up power, because my power, you know, in terms of Facebook or Google, I give up my power in the sense that I let them direct in some sense what I see for that day. The knowledge or the paper, the news that comes in, I'm giving up some power. I sell some data. You know, I don't think about it really. I just don't want to think about it. It'll be the same thing with the GPT, maybe a little bit more. I'm interested to see if there is a selling, because in my head, if you had OpenAI and they have all this data coming in from all these different companies with all this beautiful IP, all from all over the globe, why would you sell that? that's a massive source of innovation or like knowledge. You know,
it's a major issue.
oh yeah,
It's the
Huge.
single most important issue.
Yeah.
That is the domination of information
Yeah.
by commercially driven motivations.
yeah. It's like you know monopolization of like knowledge in this sense. Yeah.
Pointed at people like Bezos all the time.
Like
I think because it becomes even, you know, with OpenAI, for example, becomes even worse than Google because you
Yeah.
start understanding how do you interact with something.
right.
So that gives you much more insights into human nature than just search terms that measure intentions, as we mentioned, like how variance and intention.
Mm.
It gives a much broader scope of using that data
Yeah.
for your purpose and monopolize at all aspects. So
Mm.
I think Google has to be really scared
Yeah.
about the next big player.
Yeah.
And the next big player
And they're coming out of nowhere.
in that space will actually crowd Google.
Yeah.
Because of this kind of dynamic and interaction itself.
Mm. And like right now, there's so like, you know, like the Anthropics, like they came out of nowhere. Like that, these and like, who are these people? You know, like where did you come from? And that much power that they've just been given, you know, almost overnight, like through money, through, you know, so yeah, there's a big shift. Which is, you know, it's quite interesting in that sense.
That will be the same with server LM, I'm sure. Right?
Not quite, I don't think. Not the scale. But
like companies, I remember about this thing about the data. Like I've been like I was working in Germany as a student intern at Volkswagen, and they were talking about, there was like a meeting online about ChatGPT and like how you use it. You know, Germans are like very like with their data, they will never. So they will say that Volkswagen wants to do their own, like how possible is it that the companies do their own ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's not hard. Like money, time, people.
So do you think it's
money, time, skills? Yeah.
Do you think it's really feasible that every company, or do you think that
Not every
OpenAI will provide enterprise one?
Well, let's put it this way.
I think they already provide even.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of open source models where, again, or like these base models, like OpenAI still releases these base models that I can then take and fine tune. Fine tuning is probably going to be more feasible for the majority of enterprise individuals, or individuals to you know, rarely I think are you going to see really big models, you know, that with those big models that they come from money and power. Like the big models, that's lots of data. You need lots of legal teams to back up your use of that data. So there will be like these big, you know, but that being said, you know, the speed at which the architectures that underlie these models change, there's new companies popping up that just get, you know, millions, billions valuation overnight. Like, well, not overnight, but you know, they're popping up all the time. So it's hard to tell at this point. It's way too early to tell who takes it out completely. But yeah, it's, you know, it's cool to see that sort of stuff popping up. Now we are right on 12:30, and this is our first Survey LM slide. So so
Be patient.
yeah, look,
round three.
yeah, I think. Yeah, we got round 3. Not is it next week? It is next week. Okay, so next Wednesday. So look, we'll pick up from slide 29 of 100, and it's again with 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 4, 5, 6. Look, with this, like a lot of this stuff, it's just like, you know, this first little bit, you know, it's really about synthetic society. Like, you know, we're really setting up. Okay. When you're doing research with these AI models, think about what the data, like, you know, what are the characteristics of the model itself, and how could that be impacting the insights or the results you're getting. Okay, so the representativeness of that data set, the safety mechanisms or guardrails built in, you know, all of these things are going to impact the model. in the way it responds because they're sequence-in, sequence-out predictors. In the context of the synthetic data generation, you just got to keep that in the back of your mind. So Western education, the weird countries, they have been the dominant producers of human sort of data on the web. Inadvertently, AI models may have picked up then qualities or properties that or value perspectives of weird countries. Okay, so when I'm synthetically generating societies now, I need to just know that maybe the AI have a tendency to divert back to weird views and perspectives. Okay, so that's key out of today. Is that understanding and setting up for this synthetic, sort of generation, using these models, using prompt engineering, or using these different augmentation techniques. So we've done all this setting up to finally get into it next week. So stick with it, and we'll see you guys then. Thank you.